But thank you all so much for joining us. So welcome to our latest gutsy conversation. Today's gutsy woman is Mary Dezember, who is, I should say, Dr. Mary Dezember. Am I saying your name right? I should have asked you that before. Okay, great. And I met Mary. I want to tell how I met Mary many years ago before I started Women with Guts, because she happens to be my best friend's mother-in-law. So I met her and I got to meet her wonderful son, who has been she raised some amazing children. So if you would, Mary, to get us started before we start talking about loan debt and all that fun stuff, I'd love for you to share a little bit about yourself, your amazing kids, since that's our connection, and what they're doing and what you're doing. And then we'll get into our questions about women and student loan debt.
Okay, great. Yeah, thank you so much, Rachel, for designating me a gutsy woman. I'm really honored and inviting me to speak about this because it's something that I've just experienced and I want to share with others. I'm not working for anyone on this or whatever. It's just my experience and hoping that that will help other people. But thank you. Yes, my about mentioning my children. My children are incredible. Um, they're all very amazing people. They're my best friends and such inspirations to me. And so they all, in their own way, accomplish, great things. Elaine is an entrepreneur with the tour business, and she's lived in other countries and speaks other languages and does every aspect of the business that she created, which again, as an entrepreneur, was like she came up with a new idea and pursued it. And now she actually does hire me to lead some art tours for her. So I am really grateful about that. And I think she's super gutsy.
I would
I,
agree with that.
I always tell people that ever since I got pregnant, she was my boss, but now she pays me.
That's great. That means you definitely did something right, Mary.
I have another daughter, Maria, who runs all kinds of like marathon. I think she's like 80 or more marathons. And as you mentioned, my son Tom is an amazing musician, and what a great person he is. And his wife Lisa, who's your friend, is incredible. And my son Tony and his wife Carrie are just fun and incredible people teaching. And then she's in banking and then Sean, the youngest, is, as you know, because you know the whole family, he's quiet, he's in teaching, he's a motivational rapper and speaker, and he's just always into something quite energetic. So they're all very inspiring to me, very upbeat, inspiring people.
Yeah, and I don't know where they got that from, Mary. So no, when I met you, Mary, just your energy is contagious, and I want to just take that moment to say that the energy you've been putting towards student loan debt is contagious. When Lisa told me, knowing that I have student loan debt from my master's, not from my undergrad, actually, my parents gratefully helped me with that. But I have debt for my master's, and she said, Rachel, you should talk to Mary because she knows about this waiver. And so that's what started our conversation. And your story had inspired her. And then I came to learn you just been, really taking this on in the national level. So thank you for that. And if you would just maybe share like how you got started on your journey, towards paying off your debt, and then how you learned about the PSLF waiver and what it is.
Okay, great. And I want to real quickly say I forgot to mention my daughter Maria's husband, Kevin.
Oh, yeah.
Mentioned all the spouses, so I didn't, in case you watch this. He's amazing too. Okay, so now, and back to your question and our topic at hand today.
Yeah.
So I love how you on your event page post, Rachel, you started out by saying Mary is just one of the many women who did everything she could to get an education, and then has all this student loan debt. So if I start there and do a brief chronology, I think that will can really get into both my continuing advocacy for reform for the entire student loan system, and then also for those who have federal direct loans and are in public service. If they haven't signed up for the waiver, then hopefully this will help them to realize that this is something that they can do and should do. Um, but starting where you mentioned, when I decided I had gotten my undergrad many years before, and then I had my children, and I was at home for many years, and then I decided I wanted to go back to college and get my advanced degrees. And what I really wanted to be was a professor. That was a dream. So I was in my later 30s, and I've been at home for years. So it seemed like an impossible dream, but I was pulled. It was like a vocation, like a calling. It was like this is something that I just needed to do. So Elaine and Sean were both still very young, and then I was single when I really got into school with them. The other three were older and on their own, and I. Went to Indiana University to pursue my master's and then PhD. And so one of the things I needed was money. So I want to say that student loans are a good thing. Thank goodness for student loans, or I would have never been able to become a professor,
Mhm.
which I love, and I had a great career. However, it's the system, the repayment system, that's unlike any other debt out there. And I will address that as I learned about it more, because it's like, what's going on here? No matter how much we pay and pay and pay. And sometimes people will say, you'll hear things like, well, they just need to pay off their debt. Hey, we're trying.
Yeah,
I was paying
exactly.
off my car loans and paying on a mortgage and paying off my credit cards. And this one just would never go down. So there is no other, it's the worst debt. So anyway, so I remember looking for two things. I looked for babysitters because I had to go to classes when I was in grad school, and I also looked for financing. And I knew that there were things out there for women to grants and things like that. So money that you didn't have to pay back. So when I would go to the financial aid offices, they would tell me, they would say, oh, those are only for undergrad degrees, not for graduate degrees. And I said, why? And they said, it's because if you're a woman and a single mom at that, you need to just get a degree and get out there and get a job.
Wow.
Yeah. And I was like, so I can't advance my career more. I can't advance my education. Um, So right away, there's this thing about almost vocational, like just get out there and get a job. And being a professor, I mean, we want to build a country of critical thinkers, don't we? I mean, people who are critical thinkers, people
Right.
who vote. And what's wrong with having an education and advanced degrees? Like that shouldn't that should be a good thing and not discouraged. So I could get student loans, thankfully. And so I took out about $80,000. And when you spread that over around 6 years to get my master's and then PhD, it's not that much per year, to live on. And then I got a small stipend for being a associate instructor. So
Right.
doing teaching, that was about 3,500 a semester. So like 7,000 a year or something like that. And so I had this $80,000 debt when I started my job, and um, I started paying on it a year. They give you a year. I started paying on it, and then it was 400 to 600 a month, and I
Mhm.
paid for 20 years. Well, during that time, I started paying in 2001. So in October of 2007, the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program opened up, but I didn't even hear about it for a long time. A
Mhm.
lot of people didn't even know about it. So many years later, I think around 2011 or 12, something like that, I hear about the program, and so I contact my servicer. Well, I was on the wrong payment plan. So you're
Wow.
supposed to make 120 payments if you're in public service, which I was because my college is a state school.
It's a
Uh,
nonprofit, right?
Right. So I'm supposed to qualify, but they said, okay, you have to move to the income driven payment plan, and you also that will restart your clock. Well, I by that time I didn't even know how many more years I'd have to start over at payment one out of 120 payments.
Wow.
So I'm like, okay, well, this is a big scam. I mean, this isn't going to work for me. Um, so I went ahead and I stayed. I was on a graduated plan, so I stayed on that, making 400 to 600 payment dollars a month. Now that's a lot of money, and that was hard to do. It shaped
Mhm.
my entire career, my entire life, because I'm a single wage income earner, and you have to. So the other thing is I made sure I paid that every time, because I did go into when I first started making my payments, I just wasn't making enough money and I couldn't make them. So I went on a short deferment. Well, the unsubsidized loans capitalize and then they go into your principal. So then my principal was all of a sudden 83,000. And
Wow.
so even though I was making payments, it had gone up. So I never wanted to see that again. So one of the things about the income driven that they require you to go on for the public service loan forgiveness is it's more affordable typically for most people because they don't have the income to do $400 and $600 a month when they first start out, but it won't be enough to get into your principal. So the interest accrues daily and it's high interest. And so next thing you know, you keep owing more and more and more than you originally took out.
Right.
So I didn't want to see that happen. So I mean, and it's hard to do, and I can understand why people go the other way with the income driven, absolutely. But the other thing is if you want to be in the public service loan forgiveness program, you have to go with the income driven one.
Right.
So unless you're paying way more on top of that, you're going to end up owing more money, and it's required to do their forgiveness program. So anyway, I finally retired after 21 years, thinking I don't know, I can't get this debt down no matter what I do. I hope I can make it when I retire. Well, President Biden had been elected, and one of his campaign platform topics was maybe $50,000 in debt. I mean, $50,000 he would.
Forgive.
Right. So when I retired, I started looking into webinars, and I was getting information from from nonprofits, and there's several I'm going to mention, but the number one in my book as far as reaching out and really helping was Student Debt Crisis Center, which was started over a decade ago by a gutsy woman, Natalia Abrams,
Mhm.
and she started that nonprofit to address this crisis, but they also reach out and help people. They do what they can, so they started having all these webinars, and I started attending them. And that's when, my daughter Elaine mentioned she'd seen me go to them, because I kept waiting to hear, when is this 10,000 to 50,000? And it made a difference to me being retired because of my money situation. Well, during the pause, when it became 0% interest, I went ahead and kept making my payments. That's the first time, Rachel, that I saw my principal really go down. So it had
During
hung,
a pandemic. It took a pandemic for you
yeah,
to get your principal to go down.
right, because it was a 0% interest.
Right.
So I had gotten it down from 80. I'd gotten it down to around 65 or 64, something like that. Finally, it took years to see the needle
Mhm.
move off of the 80, but then it started to go down. So after 20 years of about 19 years of payments, I was only at principal of around $64,000 out of about 83,000. So I started taking these webinars, and I thought I'm going to learn more about this. I added up what I had paid over the whole course. Finally, after the 21 years or 20 years of payments, I had paid back over $100,000, and
Wow.
only only around 25,000 of that went to principal. So 75,000 went to interest, and I owed about 64, and then when I paid 8,000 over the 0% interest, because I was trying to get it to the 50, thinking that if Biden waved his wand and the 50 goes away, I would see that zero on my federal student aid website. And that's all I wanted to see was zero.
Golden zero, the
Yeah.
golden zero,
Yeah.
right?
Right. And that's when my eyes really opened. I was like, wait a minute, there is something really wrong with this system. This is just wrong. And so I pay and pay and pay, and I still owe 2/3 of my principal after paying over $100,000 on an $80,000 debt, and I still owe 2/3 of the principal. So then
Crazy.
they would
It's just
add,
crazy. It's
yeah,
crazy. It's simply
they would add
crazy.
daily accruing interest too on top of that 50. I'd gotten it down to around 51. So I would die with that, debt and be on my Medicare and uh
Retirement and your
my retire. Yeah, I'd be, trying to make these payments. So as I'm watching these webinars, it's great because like the Student Debt Crisis Center, people are chatting and so they have over 2 million people who support them. And all these people, like hundreds of people would watch the webinars and they'd be chatting to each other, telling our stories on the chats. So the other great thing is it builds community. These groups, like
absolutely.
the nonprofits, they build community, especially now with the chatting that we can do on the Zoom calls and everything. And you hear other stories, and I saw people who were wondering, why has my principal amount gone up? Why do I owe way more now than when I started and I'm paying? And why am I in my 70s and I'm still paying? And all these stories. And so Student Debt Crisis Center were, talking about all of the ways that things we can do, write letters. I made a donation. I got this great mask from them.
Awesome. Awesome. Love it.
And so I got really interested and involved, and because we weren't seeing any thing happen from from President Biden administration, nothing was happening. I really jumped on board and thought I want to do whatever I can to make my voice heard. And so they started collecting stories, and Senator Warren started asking for stories, and other groups too, other nonprofits, and they would pile letters in front of the White House of stories. And so I was telling my story, and I started learning more and more. Well, during that process, then the Public Service Loan Forgiveness decided to do this waiver, which basically means, and I couldn't believe it when I heard it, and it basically means they're making it work the way it should have all the time and only until October of this year. So for 1 year, because they started it last October, basically they'll accept if you got direct loans and you are in the right career that qualifies public service, and you've made your 120 payments, or you haven't yet, but you can get in now, and they will count all your past payments to October of 2007.
Wow.
Huge. Huge. I couldn't believe it. Well, the other thing is except for during this waiver, you had to also still be employed. Well, this waiver thing came out after I retired, just a month or two after.
Mhm.
Used to be, and we'll go back to why they're going back to a broken system on this. I don't know after October, and I tweet about it all the time, like it's working now, leave it. But but you had to still be working at those jobs. And so if you retired, too bad. You paid 20 years, 21 years, it doesn't matter. Or 20 years, it doesn't matter. It won't count. So now they went back to my payments. I had been paying since 2001, but they only start from October 2007 because that's when the program went in to play. And so they went all the way back to that, and they said it's okay that you're retired now. All we want to see is all the payments that you made while you were with a qualifying employer. And I had direct loans. I with the Department of Ed, the federal direct loans. Well, I added up and I had way more than 120. So I was so excited. But even then, without the Student Debt Crisis Center, and then they're not affiliated with Savvy is not they're a social impact startup in Washington, D.C. that is on their website. They're founded by longtime student loan experts and advocates, and they're working to solve it. But they have a free online tool that you can do things, and then And then they also can offer support. I think they do charge a small fee, but when they were first talking about Savvy on some of the webinars, I was skeptical at first because you want to stay away from any of these people who are like, oh, we'll take care of your student loan debt. No, 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 no.
Right.
They're not that. They're not a servicer, and they're not doing any of that. But I saw that they were with my retirement company, TIAA. They had webinars with Savvy, Student at Crisis Center, even though they're not affiliated, they kind of partner, I think is the word they call it. They partner with Savvy.
And real quick, can you just, is it SAVVY?
Oh, it's SAVI. And
SAVI, and what does that stand for?
I don't know. But they say their mission is to help the middle class prosper by tackling student loan debt crisis.
Okay.
We're
Yeah, I
creating,
just wanted to make sure people listening would know
yeah,
what it is, so
and their website is buysavvy.com. I'll put it in the chat.
okay, gotcha.
Their website is buysavvy.com. And Lindsay Clark, who is the director of external affairs, she has been fabulous, and she's so smashed and busy with. She can't work directly with everybody, and they have a lot of other people on their team who are great to work with. But I was fortunate that I went to so many webinars with Oh, and then I was going to say the National Education Association, which is I'm not in that group, but they also partnered with Savvy. And I thought, okay, these are all reputable places.
Right.
So Savvy really, and I went to as many of their webinars as I could, and I went to every Student at Crisis Center webinar. If it was held in about California legislation, it doesn't matter if I'm not in California. I went. I wanted to hear everything. Well, what happened is they saw my name because I was at every one and I was chatting in all of them. So we ended up like knowing each other,
Right.
Natalia and also the executive director so Natalia is president and founder of Student at Crisis Center, and then Cody Hananian is the executive director, and then Lindsay is the director of external affairs with Savvy. So those three in particular really got to know who I was, and they would say, "Hi, Mary," and this and that.
Awesome.
So I was very fortunate that because I was so present at these, but I needed that support because even though my situation looked with the waiver I had one employee. So some people have had a lot of different employers over different times that are public service, and so they have to kind of patch it all together, and that's even more work. Mine was pretty clear cut. I'd had the same employer since 2000. So from 2007 to 2021, I paid every month. So it was obvious I had my payments, and I had one employer, and that employer was sort of verified to be, one of the qualifying employers. So mine looked pretty cut and dried. But even then, for webinar after webinar, I mean, part of the reason they know me is because I would ask the same question over and over. I'm retired. Is that okay? I'm
Right.
retired. Is that okay? Do I still count? I had the direct loans. Does that still count? So what I'm saying here is that it's hard to trust. You go to studentaid.gov and you have a website there. A web page, and you have to be, if you have direct federal loans, you need to be signed in with them. That's where all your information is. And they have a lot of helpful information on their website. And that's where you go to apply for the PSLF waiver and so forth. But they make it sound like, oh, it's just cut and dried. It's just easy. And when this was brand new, I thought, okay, it's hard to trust that they'll
Right.
really go through with this. And so I kept
Right, especially with changing administrations and things like that. I mean, what's happening one year may not happen in 4 or 5 years, as we all know.
right,
Programs get cut. So,
exactly.
and real quick, before you continue with that, I want to make sure it's clear to everyone who's watching. PSLF, public service, it could be you're working for a college, university, it could be working in the nonprofit sector, could be working in a school corporation in your hometown. Am I missing anything in terms of public government? Of course, is public service,
Yeah,
government.
government. Yeah, and only the public schools, not private.
Okay,
So
right.
yeah, so the studentaid.gov site does have it's very clear now. And also Student Debt Crisis Center website, and another one I wanted to point out that's been very helpful. I mean, there's so many that have been helpful, but I've personally been able to work with Student Debt Crisis Center, and then also with Savvy. But the Student Borrower Protection Center is another nonprofit focused on alleviating the burden. They and the Student Debt Crisis Center have web pages on their websites devoted just to this, and they have videos with step by step exactly
Right.
where you go and what you do. And so it'll say on that studentaid.gov website, which is of the Department of Ed, the federal loan system, student loan system, it will tell you on that page the jobs that the careers that qualify. And let's say if you work for a public school, it's any job, as I understand it. You don't have to be a
Okay.
teacher. Like you can be any job at,
Right.
like at my college where I worked, it's anybody there, no matter what their job was.
Right.
So they'll have that, and then they also, and it has to be direct loans, with and if they're not, you can consolidate and make them direct loans. So that's why people should really get involved. If they think that they qualify, they should look into it now, because again, they're going to stop it in October, and it's like they're going to go back to the same way it was before, which was, in my opinion,
Mhm.
broken. I mean, you have to go to the income driven. Now whatever you can't, whatever their rules were before, and whatever rules they're going to have. But I'll just wind up my story, because I know you had some other questions too that we need to address. But so as I kept researching this situation, so I put in my application, and again, my situation was pretty cut and dried, and I you have to submit it to FedLoan, which is going to go out of this soon and move everything to another servicer. But
Mhm.
anyway, as of now, you still submit everything to FedLoan. And I got the form signed by my HR person, the whole thing, and submitted in early November. And I didn't hear anything from FedLoan, like not even an acknowledgement that they had gotten my application
Mhm.
for way over a month, or longer. And then it took a while, and during that time I could reach out to Student Debt Crisis Center and also Lindsay at Savvy, and just for kind of reassurance, or do you think there's
Sure.
anything else I need to do? And there were a couple times they said, let's I do want to say that if it also helps, because there is a ombudsman with the studentaid.gov, and I'm sure they're all swamped during this process, but knowing, should I reach out to the ombudsman, things like that, it was good to have somebody to talk to and
Right.
not feel like I was alone in this process. So bottom line is, by March, I got the notification that yes, I had way more than the payments that I needed. I had the 120 qualifying payments. My employer
Mhm.
qualified. I had the right loans, all of that. And
And
I
that's
got
March
the
of this year, right? I just want to make
yes.
sure. So can you describe to me really quickly, how did that feel when you got that letter of just, what feelings went through through
Oh,
you?
Rachel, I started to cry. I started to cry, and I danced, and I danced. I felt like, and I know when Elaine mentioned earlier, my kids have all they've heard my whole life, my whole career is, if I didn't have this student loan debt, maybe, I'm always the poorest one in the room, and I'm a professor, but, and also one of the things I found out with these chats, I mean, the kind of guilt and shame you carry, everybody feels that.
Oh yeah.
Like, we're paying, okay, 400 and 600 a month. Like,
Yeah.
why? And then people are like, well, just pay your debts. I'm trying. I have been,
Yeah. I
and
think that I think people who take on student loan, and I want to talk about that really briefly before we get to Q&A, why women have more student loans than men. I think there's a level of optimism, right? I think it's kind of like, well, okay, call me crazy for being an optimist and thinking I could pay this back, thinking, because as I heard, growing up, well, if you have a master's, you can get a really good job, you know? And so, and the truth is, a lot of people with a master's do get a good job, and you got a good job, you know? And I know a lot of people who get good jobs and still have a really hard time paying the loans back. And it's because of what you're saying. The system is broken. And that's what people aren't getting, I think, who didn't accrue the debt, who weren't as, whatever you want to call it, optimistic or as into learning or whatever, or school. But my joke about being in Bloomington actually is that stick around long enough and you're going to end up with a master's. Stick around even longer, you'll end up with a PhD. It's like, because it's like everybody's doing it. I'm not saying there's peer pressure, but it's, if anything, it's more like, well, they just went got their master's, I guess I should too, you know? And so it's like, I don't think that wanting an education, people should be punished for or made to feel guilty, and not understanding. The worst thing is probably honestly what most people are guilty of, whether it's a phone contract, whether it's, their internet, whatever, is reading the fine print and really, and doing that math, right? Because if you'd done that math, and if I'd done that math, by the way, which I'm sure, I signed the papers, I knew what the math was, you would go, wait a minute, is this a good idea? And I don't regret it. I don't regret getting a master's. I do. It's been difficult because I'm in a field that, art education, and the arts are notoriously, underfunded. I think we're getting better at that. But it is hard to find a job in a town that's saturated with people who have master's degrees and PhDs. And there are people with a PhD working at a grocery store, 100% in Bloomington. Like, I have friends with PhDs. And how do you pay back your student loans if you're working in a grocery store?
Right. I was having a hard time paying them back. Like you said, I was fortunate that I did get a job as a professor and I had a good career. So those are all good comments. And I want to make, I know we're don't have a lot of time. There are some points I really want to make because there are people who think, again, that we're some point. So yes, women, as we know, you and I know because we put it on but other people might not know. So it's been researched that 2/3 of the debt is held by women.
Right.
And the majority of those are Black women. Also, I've read that Black women are more highly educated as well. They really value their education. And then you were saying, so people in Bloomington are highly educated. Well, what's wrong with that? Should be a good thing. So, right. I mean, it isn't always about vocation or what job you're going to get. It's great if you can get a job with a master's or PhD. Right. That is, but even if you're not, so I would ask you, Rachel, do you feel like getting your master's was a different type of education than your bachelor's?
No, but I would be comparing apples and oranges because I went to a very small liberal arts school. I went to DePaul University for my undergrad and I loved it. And I loved being there. I love IU, but the master's program for me was interesting. But at that point, I'd been working in the field. So for me, I feel like I'd almost earned a master's just by all the work that I'd been doing. And so it was, so I got the degree and I got, and I've used it somewhat, but if I had to go back and do it again, knowing the loan debt, I wouldn't. 100% I wouldn't.
Right. So, and that's even for me, I had a great career, but before all of this happened and I saw, would I ever going to see a light at the end of the tunnel? Well, with the PSLF waiver, I did, but I still couldn't believe it was going to happen until it really did. Same thing. I'm like, I love the career I had, but really if I had known,
worth it not being able to do things that you'd go on a vacation or.
Well, right. But I don't even know what kind of job I would have gotten. But even then, it's like, should we be strapped? So some of the tweets, so just to wrap up, I want to say some of the tweets I have sent out on Twitter, because I think there I have to be really concise. And I've come up with some really concise ways of dealing with this because once after I felt so amazing, I thought everyone should feel like this.
Yes.
Because I had shared and met so many people, we all feel that way. And what if they're not in public service? Or like you said, what if they didn't even finish so a lot of them have debt and didn't even get the degree, right? Wow. And so there's all this out there with a broken system. So people are like, well, don't bail them out. Hey, it's not a bailout when it is a broken system, because so my belief and what I've been advocating for, both tweets and signing petitions and just reaching out and trying to help people, and then you inviting me to this, because again, this is all just my own personal experience. I'm not working for anyone, and so anybody
Right.
watching this, you can't. So anything I say here is just personal experience stuff. You got to look into everything yourself,
Absolutely.
and like well
Absolutely.
Mary said, you have to look in and find your own path and your own people to support you. But I'm really encouraging that you do that
Right.
because
There
and
are resources.
yeah, if you don't have public service loans, then or weren't in that job, then the other option is just what I was doing before that option came along, is just this constant advocating and going to these webinars and signing the petitions and sharing your stories, your voice. The more and more voices that we have out there, and the more that you find out other people are in your situation, and the more you realize it's a broken system. So this is why it's a broken system. So the black and brown borrowers together as a community, men and women, are disproportionately affected by this. Women, all women, hold 2/3 of the debt, and then the majority of those are black women. And I did go to a webinar one time to hear more about that and hear the black women speak about their situations, because I was interested in hearing. So it says right on the federal student aid website, I'm going to read it. Unlike other forms of debt, such as credit cards and mortgages, direct loans are daily interest loans. On daily interest loans, interest accrues, adds up every day. That was quote unquote on this. So there, why? So one of my tweets was, why, POTUS? Like, why? It's also high interest. Mine
Yeah.
was at 5 something, but I've heard other people much higher, 6 to 8, whatever. So
Wow.
mortgages, well, you can't refinance your student loan with the federal government and get a lower mortgage. So I had been paying the same, and they have terrible penalties. Once I was late a day, and they jumped it up like and a quarter% or something. Well, after
Wow.
that I went on the automatic payment plan, so I would
Right.
never, uh, because they have these terrible penalties on top of it. And so the other thing is that it's almost virtually impossible to file bankruptcy. So it's high interest, it accrues daily. And I looked up this accruing, and you can be talking, depending on what a person owes, thousands in a month, because it's accruing daily. And so some of the things I've written is student loan debt is not like other debt. It's high interest rates that accrue daily, and steep penalties make it almost impossible to make a dent in the principal. And my soundbite, besides this is what I call modern indentured servitude, because you just can't get out from under it, is also education should be a benefit, not a burden.
Hmm.
And that's the one I tweet all the time. And I have, let's see, another one I wanted to share.
And then we should probably get to the Q&A, because I want to
Okay.
make sure if anybody has questions, I want to make sure we have time for that.
Okay. Let me see. Education is important for careers and for a country of critical thinkers. Higher education should be available for all who want it without lifelong crushing debt, daily accruing high interest, crazy penalties, and no bankruptcy option. I am advocating for reform for the entire student loan system. So again, it's, I have tweet. If you go to my Twitter account, you'll see tweet after tweet after tweet I try to have, short things that I can put on there that I hope would make sense. It's like, most of the borrowers are women. Most of
Yeah.
them are people of color. Most of them are, so bottom line is only the people who needed the help are going to take out student loans. The people who don't need it aren't going to take it out. So the system has used the people who needed the help by making us pay forever with daily accruing high interest and keeping us from. So what's that about? So I don't see, once people understand that this isn't like other other loans out there, and that it's targeted the people who needed the help, like women, like black and brown borrowers, you
Right.
know. So what's even the the argument about. They're imagining like some rich people out there that just decided we don't want to pay our debt or something. That is not it. Like we are paying, and we
Right.
can't do, we can't. So anyway, I'll end there. I mean, I have a lot more obviously to say about it. I'm very passionate about it, and I
And I
fortunately
appreciate that.
worked
Yeah.
out for me, and I encourage people to look into the public service loan forgiveness waiver option. Again, don't take any of what I say as things you absolutely should do, but I highly encourage that you at least look into it and look into nonprofit groups that can support you in that journey, because it did work for me. And
Right.
I think that sometimes people are like, did it work for anybody? And, and it did work for me, thank goodness. But I want everybody, when you asked how did it feel, I want everybody to feel that feeling. So I think they need to cancel, and the word forgiveness, we don't like it because it sounds like we did something wrong. So it's like, cancel, let's cancel the debt, but can't after you've also fixed this broken system. Why not a 1%? That would be enough to pay the servicers. I mean, because a 1% that doesn't accrue daily. It's
Right.
a monthly, like a mortgage, that it's set. And then keep the PSLF working the way it is now. Don't just make it a temporary waiver.
Right.
So if you did that, if they would add up the amount of money that people have paid, like I did, I paid over 100,000. If they would add that up they talk about how much is still owed out there. Well, that's because the system has set it up that it's accruing so much every day that it just
Right.
keeps getting higher and higher and higher.
Right.
That's only for them. The servicers are supposed to get all that, right?
And
So
the
it's like,
government.
if you look at how much people have paid individually,
Right.
like, we've probably all paid off our debt at least once and maybe twice over.
Yeah. And if the government can bail out Wall Street, if and we let that happen, then why can't the government bail out women and people of color, people wanting to further their education? So thank you for all that, Mary. I really, really appreciate it. And your Twitter is
Well, let's
at
station
Mary
of critical
DE.
thinkers.
Your Twitter is at MaryDezember, right?
I think so.
Okay, great. But you can find Mary. That's how you spell her name. You can find her
I
on
think
Twitter, right?
sometimes it's Mary _ Dezember with some of the social media, but I think with Twitter it's just my whole name at
Okay,
Mary.
great. So you can find
So I
Mary on
put that
Twitter
in the
and
chat. My
Facebook.
name is
Oh,
Mary
great.
Dezember, and I also have a
Okay.
website.
Yeah.
MaryDezember.com. Now that my website is more about me being an author and other things, but
Yeah.
if you want to get a hold of me, those are ways you can. Yeah.
And you just published your first book, right? Which we'll have to do a whole separate Zoom
Oh
on.
yeah. Well, I mean, it's accepted for publication, but it isn't out yet. Yeah.
And what's the name of the book, really quickly?
Wild Conviction.
That's right.
Yeah.
So which I have my
Doesn't fit me
copy.
at all.
I have my digital copy, I think.
Yeah.
So good luck with that. But now we only have a few minutes left.
Okay.
So I do want to open up if any of you in the room have any questions or anything you want to share, feel free to take yourself off mute and ask any questions. Any questions from any of the gutsy women in the room? I know, and thank you all for coming today. I guess if there are no questions from you in the room, I'm checking the chat. I would love to end on one question and just maybe food for thought, which is kind of getting back to the why of why women have more debt and why people of color. I think we have to remember that 100 years ago, you and I wouldn't have gone to college, Mary. 100 years ago, 150 years ago, and I think that. Isn't it amazing that you and I were encouraged to go, that my parents, especially my father, encouraged me to get the degree, So I think to me, that's also like, again, I think the why is rooted in that, like why, and I think that we have to consider that, we talk about things like, the kind of the debt that America owes to people of color, right? The debt that we owe descendants of slavery, right? And so I think we can't have this conversation without thinking about those things. And it's sort of like how the prison system, we all know now, or most of us know or should know or have an inkling that the prison system is so skewed against people of color, and people call it modern day slavery, and people of color don't understand how white people don't understand that, So I think we have to look at student loan debt as you said, indentured servitude, like it is, how far away are we? And yeah, while I'm grateful for my education and that it exists, if the education means you end up, owing your life to this institution and to paying this bill that's just weighing you down, then is it worth it? Was that education worth it? And I think a lot of people, and then we're seeing that in young people now, which is a whole other conversation, I think, but young people going, I don't want to go in debt. I don't want to go. So they're not going to school. Right. And so it's a very interesting kind of pendulum swing, I think. But did you want to add anything to that? Or do you think there's something,
Well, based on
yeah.
what you said, one of my tweets is, do we want future generations to decide higher education is too high of a price to pay? No. I believe in education and critical thinking. So at POTUS, cancel student debt and reform for future borrowers. Education should be a benefit, not a burden. So again, and
Yes.
for me, even if I hadn't become a professor, getting my master's and PhD was life changing. The whole kind of critical thinking that I was doing on those courses and everything.
Mhm.
I really don't want to trade. I mean, I'm so glad I do have my education, but yes, when I kept seeing that looming debt, sometimes I wondered, you
Yeah.
know. And so yeah, I think as far as women go, there's all kinds of studies into that, and there is a great group called the United State of Women, which is a nonprofit, too, and they've looked into a lot of things. But women don't get paid as much as men,
Yeah.
and
I'm glad you mentioned that.
Black and brown people tend to not get paid as much as white people and stuff like that. So we've got all of these other issues or we maybe aren't getting hired at the same rate.
Right.
And so we just have a lot of things against us, which is why we reached out. I was a single mom, and so women reach out, want to better their lives, and we think we're going to be able to pay that debt back because we've paid. I came from a family that you pay your debt, and that
Right.
and I always do. And I did pay this debt. I want to say that too, because you hear all kinds of things on Twitter, right? I did pay my debt back. Again,
and then some.
Right. And so it's not that, it's the way it's set up to make it so that they're profiting, off of our inability to be able to. I mean, some people can't, buy homes or start their businesses or do anything. So,
yeah. So I think it's a great place to that your last tweet was wonderful. I'm so glad just as a result of this conversation or connecting about this interview, I'm following you on Twitter. Thanks for following me back. I am on Twitter, guys. If you guys want to follow me, I'm Godiva Rachel or Godiva Rachel, whichever way you want to pronounce it, because I do love chocolate and Lady Godiva and being a diva. No, I don't think I'm that much of a diva, but thank you all so much for coming today. Thank you, Dr. Mary Dezember, for sharing your story. And thank you guys. I know that some of you everybody's still in the room. So thank you for the comments in the chat. And Dr. Mary Dezember, good luck with all of your work. I'm going to end the call for now, but stay in touch and feel free to leave comments on our page or below. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you, Rachel. Thanks, everybody.
Bye, Mary. Bye.
Bye.